1.2, the coordinate plane. This is basically a vocabulary lesson showing you all the different parts of the coordinate plane. You'll find this in your book as well, but this is definitely important for your notes to self. So this is the coordinate plane. You're always going to be using graph paper in this unit because you're going to always be using a graph, so I recommend and in fact require your use of a ruler to make it precise. Okay, so you have two lines here. You want to think about them as two different number lines that intersect at the 0 point. So this line, the horizontal line, is called the x-axis. And the up and down line is called the y-axis. And the y-axis is best remembered because y has a tail, so that helps you remember the up and down form of the y-axis. The x-axis is always the horizontal, the y-axis is always the vertical. So I said these are two number lines. So on the x-axis, this is 0. It's hard for me to write that on here. So this first blue line is 1. The second blue line, 2. And remember, we're labeling lines and not spaces. So today we're going to label all these lines, but tomorrow you're going to stop because I know you know how to count them. So these go into the negatives, and so on. And then when you go into the y-axis, this also is 0. So when I go up, it's all my positive numbers. And when I go down, it's all of my negative numbers. And again, remember, we're labeling lines and not spaces. Okay, so this point right here in the middle is what we call the origin, because it's kind of the starting point for the graph. So origin sounds like origination or starting point. This is the origin right here. It's the 0 point for the x and the 0 point for the y. And the way you write it is 0, 0. So the origin has the coordinates 0, 0. Okay, and I'll get back to the coordinate part in a moment. The x-axis and the y-axis we've talked about. So I'm going to skip quadrants for a moment and go to ordered pair and coordinates. You can put points all over this graph, and the points are called ordered pairs. And they're ordered pairs because they have an x-coordinate and they have a y-coordinate. You always put the x first, so the number in this position is always referring to the x-axis, and the number in this position is always referring to the y-axis. And if you forget that, just remember that x and y go in alphabetical order, so that will help you remember which one comes first and which one comes second. So that would be the ordered pairs, and we're going to practice a few of those. And coordinates, you can talk about each individual one as the x-coordinate and y-coordinate. So this ordered pair right here, this point right here, has the ordered pair of, well, along the x-axis I've got 5, and along the y-axis I've got 6, so this one is 5, 6. This ordered pair right here, see if you can guess what that one would be. Along the x, we're at -6, so that's the first one I put. And then along the y, we're at -2. Resembles the game Battleship that you've probably played before. If I chose a different color and I said, well, I want to graph the point -4, 7, well, again, you're lining up x with my first number and y with my second number. So if I look along my x-axis, I find -4, and I don't put the point there, I just wait until I get my y, which is +7, and where those two intersect is that point. So hopefully that makes sense to you. You'll practice a whole lot of that. I like to think that you have to think about the first number as going down the runway this way or going down the runway this way, and you think about the second number as the plane taking off, going up or down. So down the runway and then either taking off or down the runway and taking off downward. Okay, finally, the last thing to notice is the quadrants. Quadrants are, quad of course means 4, so we're talking about these 4 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. And so I'm going to erase this because it kind of gets in my way. The quadrants here just have a name and a reference. This one is quadrant 1, and quadrant 1 is always going to have a positive x and a positive y. Notice how all the points in this area will be positive, positive. This one is quadrant 2, and actually I'm going to write that here, positive, positive. This is quadrant 2. My x term in quadrant 2 will always be negative. My y term in quadrant 2 will always be positive. So that's going to always have the form negative, positive. Quadrant 3, notice how we're going counterclockwise around. Quadrant 3, my x-coordinate will always be a negative, and my y-coordinate will always be a negative. So it's a negative, negative. And quadrant 4, you're in this region here. Your x-coordinate is always going to be positive, and your y-coordinate is always going to be negative. So you're going to play some games, I believe, of crocodiles and coconut games, much like Battleship. You're going to do a fun little picture, practicing plotting your points. It is important. Don't skip it. It's very important because this is a critical baseline skill for graphing. I'll see you in the next unit when we start to add on some equations and graphing lines.